Tom Williams sat in a chair on his covered patio, waiting for Julia, or Yulia, as he affectionately called her, his wife of nearly 20 years, to walk through the door. Sarah Miles, a friend and colleague, was seated at a right angle to his right. Tom took a drag from his cigarette, crushed it in the ashtray on the table in front of him, took a sip of his coffee, and lit another cigarette. "Are you okay, Tom?" Sarah asked. He shook his head slowly. "No," after a brief pause, Sarah said, "but I'm glad you're here. That's what friends are for." Tom nodded in response, recalling his marriage, which had taken place almost 22 years earlier. He had just completed his 4-year service in the Marine Corps, where he had served as a military police officer and a member of the parliament. He had always wanted to become a police officer, more specifically, a detective. After finishing his service, he returned to college as a full-time student, taking advantage of the benefits provided to veterans. His goal was to earn a degree in criminal justice and become a police officer. That's where he met Julia. She was finishing her degree in business administration, and they both happened to be enrolled in the same business law class. She was immediately drawn to him, the Marine combat veteran standing a little over 6 feet tall, weighing 200 pounds, with solid muscle, broad shoulders, and a lean waist. He looked striking in any uniform he wore. They started dating, fell in love, and got married after graduating from college. She was about 5 years younger than him and had previously been engaged once. She never explained why the engagement ended, only mentioning that her former fiancé had graduated from high school a couple of years before her and moved to New York. Tom didn't care about her past relationships. Back in the Marines, he had lived something of an adventurous life, chasing women wherever and whenever he could. But when he met Yulia, he knew he had found his soulmate and was determined to settle down with her. They got married immediately after graduation. Tom was able to join the police department, though it took 6 months before he could start the police academy. In the meantime, he was assigned to work as a 911 dispatcher. He knew the job was temporary, but at least he was earning a paycheck. Julia began working for an investment firm with offices across the country. Together, they earned enough to afford a small but comfortable apartment, which suited them just fine since they spent most of their time together in the bedroom. Julia enjoyed her job, but the only part Tom didn't like was the mandatory quarterly meetings on the East Coast, either in Washington, D.C., or New York. These meetings usually consisted of seminars about the latest legislative changes, but they sometimes included gatherings with various officials. She said the trips generally lasted only 3 days, though they could occasionally stretch to a week. It bothered him whenever she was away, but what truly surprised him was what happened after one of her trips. She gave birth to their first child, Andrew, about 6 months after Tom graduated from the police academy, which was approximately a year and a half after they got married. 2 years later, she gave birth to their second daughter, Marie. Julia had complications during Marie's birth, and she convinced Tom to undergo a procedure afterward. Both children inherited their mother's blonde hair and striking blue eyes. His mother once suggested he get a DNA test to confirm the children were his, but he dismissed the idea, saying, "Yulia would never cheat on me." "If you say so," his mother replied quietly. About 5.5 years after joining the police force, Tom took the detective exam and passed with honors. He also easily passed the oral exam, thanks to his continued studies and his time in the Marine Corps. No one had expected him to become a detective so early in his career, but he did, surprising everyone, including himself. The promotion couldn't have come at a better time since they wanted to buy a house big enough for their growing family. They found a nice 2-story house with 3 bedrooms in a decent neighborhood and bought it. By then, Julie had earned a couple of promotions and was also making more money. A few months after he became a detective, Tom accompanied Julie to her company's Christmas event, held in the ballroom of the local Marriott Hotel. Julie introduced him to Alf Henriksen, a mid-level manager from New York. "Oh yes, one of the best in the city," Alf said, shaking Tom's hand. "I've heard you just became a detective." I'll definitely sleep better tonight, knowing you're on the job. Thanks, Tom said, suppressing his irritation. There was something about the man that unsettled him. Like Yulia, Alf had long blonde hair and the deepest blue eyes Tom had ever seen in a man. But there was something else about him that felt off, though Tom couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. So, you seem to be the strongest one around, huh? Alf asked, in a tone that confused Tom. Alf smiled, noticing Tom's confusion. You know, I was once engaged to Yulia. That was before I graduated from high school and moved to New York. I see, Tom said. Anyway, I'm glad we finally got to meet, Alf added. I've heard a lot about you. Is it true you earned one of those Silver Star medals in Iraq? Yes, it's true. Ah, a war hero, Alf said. Well, thank you for your service. Just doing my job, Tom replied in an indifferent tone. The real heroes are usually the ones who come home in coffins. Of course, Alf said. Tom danced with his wife and watched her dance with Alf a couple of times. He noticed the tall man whispering something to Yulia, but apart from that, he didn't see any inappropriate contact between them. When they finished, Tom escorted Yulia back to her seat and returned her to Alf with a deliberate attitude. It was a pleasure seeing you again, Julie, Alf said. And it was a great pleasure finally meeting you, sir, Alf added with a slight bow toward Tom. I see, Tom said, noting the faint smile on the man's face. As they drove home, Tom turned to Yulia. This was the guy you were engaged to in college before we met, he asked. Yes, that was him, she said softly. Don't you think it would have been a good idea to tell me you're working with an old flame, he asked. He works in New York, and we don't see each other often, she said. He's in a completely different department from mine. I'm sorry, I just didn't think it would matter. It was so long ago. Still, you're right, I probably should have told you. Forgive me. Of course, he said. So, what happened between you two, if you don't mind me asking? Not at all, she replied. I wanted to get married and have kids. He wanted the benefits of marriage without the responsibilities, you know, kids, bills, a mortgage, all that stuff. When he moved to New York, he made it clear he'd probably date other women. I decided it would be best to end the engagement. I see, Tom said. Do you have any regrets? She smiled, looked at him, and shook her head. Not at all, she said. I have everything a girl could dream of. She took his right hand with her left, brought it to her lips, and kissed it. And right now, I'd love for you to take me to our bedroom and make love to me passionately and wildly. Your wish is my command, my love, he said. Tom never saw Alf again, and Yulia never mentioned his name after that, so he put the meeting aside and didn't think about it again. The quarterly meetings continued, and Tom never noticed anything in Yulia's behavior that suggested a problem. She was always loving and attentive, and their married life seemed to thrive. Over time, Tom met several of Yulia's friends from her office. They seemed friendly enough, though he had a nagging feeling they were hiding something. He became quite close with Alice, one of Yulia's colleagues, after she and her husband witnessed an armed robbery at a downtown bank. Tom had caught the robber, and the couple later testified in court. By that time, he had served on the police force for over 17 years and had risen to the rank of lieutenant. Sometimes, he stopped by Yulia's office for lunch and always tried to check on Alice, as she and her husband had experienced some trauma from the incident. Staring down the barrel of a loaded shotgun can have that effect on a person. Still, he admired their bravery when they stood tall and testified in court. When the prosecutor asked Alice if she could identify the man, she confidently answered yes, pointed directly at the defendant, and declared loudly, "That's him." That had been about 2.5 years ago. However, lately, Tom had noticed that Alice was looking at him strangely whenever he passed by. It was the same look he had noticed from several of Julia's co-workers at the company events he attended with her. At the time, it seemed strange, but he didn't give it much thought. One day, however, he decided to find out what was bothering him. He entered the room where Julia and Alice were working and headed toward his wife's office. However, Alice intercepted him before he could reach it. "Yuli stepped out for a while," she said. Tom asked when she would return. "She said she needed to deliver some documents to the legal department, so it might take a while," Alice replied. She noticed the expression on his face and decided to press on with her own question. "Is there a problem, Alice?" Tom asked. "Is everything okay between you and your wife?" "Everything's fine with us," she said. "I'm just curious, did you know Yuli was seeing Alf when we went to the East Coast?" "That's not true," Tom said. "Why are you asking?" "She said you two have an open marriage and that you're okay with it because of your trauma," Alice explained. "Trauma?" Tom asked, confused. "She said you got injured on the job and couldn't perform at night," Alice added. "I'm sorry if I'm sticking my nose where it doesn't belong," she said quickly when she noticed the surprise on his face. "You're right, I'm not injured, and I have no idea why she would say something like that," Tom said. "Alice, do you have any proof of this?" "I have some photos I took with my phone the last time we were there," she said. "If you want, I can email them to you." "Sure, that would be fine," he said, writing his email address on the back of his business card and handing it to her. "Do you know how long this has been going on?" "I'm not sure, but I've seen them together every time we've gone," she said. "For how long?" Tom pressed. "I've been here for about 5 years," she replied. "I see. Do me a favor, please," he said quietly. "Don't mention that we talked, okay?" "Word of honor," she said. "I'll send them to you right now." "Thanks, Alice," he said. "And by the way, I've never been injured on the job, and I can perform just fine. See you." With those words, he left, his mind and heart in turmoil. Had she really cheated on him with Alf? Traders usually show some kind of sign when they're involved in an illicit relationship, he thought. But he couldn't recall anything that raised suspicion. Julia had always seemed loving and attentive, never giving the slightest hint that something was going on. Of course, he had never checked her luggage or demanded that she describe her itinerary in detail. She always called every night when she was away, but that didn't necessarily mean anything. He knew Alice might have exaggerated a little, so he decided to wait until he saw the photos before taking further action. He received them about 10 minutes after leaving Yuli's workplace. He almost lost his lunch when he looked at the pictures. He saw Yuli kissing Alf while they danced, with Alf's hand resting dangerously low on her back, just above her rear, beneath a short skirt Tom had never seen her wear before. His eyes filled with tears when he saw a photo of the two entering an elevator, Yuli smiling at Alf with a look Tom knew all too well, the look she always gave him before they made love. When he returned to his office, he found it difficult to focus on his work. Staring at the situation board, he decided to call it a day and go home. "You okay, Lieutenant?" one of the other detectives asked as Tom headed out. "Just some heartburn," Tom said. "Must have eaten something bad. I'm going home for the rest of the day." "All right," the detective replied. "See you tomorrow." "Yeah, see you," Tom said, walking out of the room. Back home, he grabbed a beer and sat down in front of his computer. He opened his calendar to check when Julia's next trip to the East Coast was scheduled. He saw that it was in a couple of days, Friday, to be exact, and judging by the highlighted dates on the calendar, she would be gone for an entire week. He copied the photos from his phone to his computer and enhanced them. He zoomed in on Alf's face, and that's when the ground seemed to collapse beneath him. Now he understood why the man's face had triggered something in him all those years ago when they first met. He pulled out photos of his 2 children and compared them with Alf's face. Andrew was the spitting image of Alf, and Marie came in a close second. Holding back tears, Tom realized he needed definitive proof. He found the number of a company he knew offered quick and reliable DNA testing and made a call. After arranging to pick up a testing kit, he was about to leave when his phone rang. The ringtone told him it was Yuli. "Hello," Tom said. "Are you okay?" she asked, concerned. "You sound a bit off." "Everything's fine. It's just that the case I'm working on is a bit frustrating," he said. "Also, my stomach's a little upset." "What's up?" "Well, I've got a week-long trip to the East Coast coming up, so I'll be working late with the managers here on the itinerary," she said. "We'll probably go out to dinner and have a couple of drinks afterward, so I won't be back until after 11. Can you watch the kids tonight?" "No problem," he said. This was nothing new. She always met with management before her quarterly meetings and typically got home well after 11:30. "Thank you so much," she said. "Make sure they're in bed by 9:30. They have exams tomorrow, and I want them well rested." "Of course," he said. "You're the best. See you later." "Love you." "Yeah," he said. "I love you too." They ended the conversation, and Tom realized that the hardest part of all this was pretending nothing was wrong between him and Yuli. If what he suspected was true, it would mean she had been cheating on him throughout their entire marriage. The only way to handle this without losing control was to treat it like any other criminal case, with cold, hard detachment. He had to follow the evidence and see where it led. He picked up a DNA test kit and arrived home before the kids. He knew he would have to wait until they were asleep before collecting samples. The last thing he wanted was for them to realize something was going on. They weren't fools, and they would have picked up on it if he asked them for saliva samples. He hated the deception, but he decided it was necessary. Next, he scrolled through his contact list and found the name he was looking for, Roger Dan Levy. Roger was a former police detective who had retired a couple of years ago, moved back to New York, his hometown, and started his own private investigation service. His specialty? Cheating spouses. Tom made the call, hoping to catch him at his office. Dan Levy Associates, his friend answered. "Roger. How's it going, old friend?" Tom asked. "Tom Williams. Is that you?" Roger asked in surprise. "Yeah, it's me," Tom confirmed. "How's life been treating you?" "Well, there are more cheating spouses out there than you can imagine," Roger said, laughing. "So, what's up? Finally realized you'll never make captain and want to join the fun? I could use a good man like you." "No, nothing like that," Tom said. "But I might have a job for you, if you're willing to take it, of course. And I'll pay you." "Don't tell me you think Yuli is cheating on you," Roger said. "I'm almost sure of it," Tom replied. "And if my suspicions are right, it's been going on for a long time." "Damn," Roger muttered. "She's going to be in town for a week starting Friday?" "Yeah," Tom said. "I'll email you her itinerary and a photo of her, along with the guy I suspect she's been seeing." "I get it. You want the full package, audio, video, photos, and a written report, right?" "Yes, everything," Tom confirmed. "Don't hold back. I need to know the whole truth. How much do you think this will cost me?" "Listen, Tom," Roger said. "You saved my neck more than once. Just cover my expenses, and buy me a beer when it's all over. That's enough. I'm not going to take advantage of you." "You don't owe me anything, Roger." "I'll pay for your time," Tom insisted. Roger's thick New York accent made Tom chuckle. "You've got my back." "Thanks, Roger. You're a real friend." Roger laughed. "That's what friends are for. Now, let me give you my secure email address." Tom wrote down the address and spelled it back to make sure he got it right. "Thanks, old friend," Tom said. "As soon as I have her itinerary, I'll email it to you." "I'll investigate," Roger assured him. "We'll talk soon." They ended the call just as the kids returned from school. "Pizza okay for tonight, guys?" Tom asked as he walked into the living room. "Sure," they answered eagerly. "Mom went to one of her meetings again?" Andrew asked. "Yeah," Tom said. "She's leaving Friday and will be gone for a week." "A whole week?" Marie asked. Tom couldn't help but notice the sarcasm in her voice. "Yes, a week," Tom said. "So, you two better behave. You know I'm armed and have handcuffs," he added jokingly, making them both laugh. He ordered pizza, and they ate in the living room while watching television. "Are you guys ready for your exams tomorrow?" he asked. "Pretty much," Marie said, and Andrew nodded in agreement. "Well, maybe you should spend some time with your books before heading to the bunk," he said, using the nautical term for bed. "Mom lets us stay up until 10 on exam nights," Andrew protested. "Don't be silly," Tom said. "Lights out exactly at 9 p.m. Shouldn't it be by 9 p.m., Dad?" Marie asked. "You're absolutely right, dear daughter," Tom said. "Now, off you go. Upstairs." They grabbed their books and headed upstairs. Tom watched them go to their rooms. They were good kids, and he loved them deeply. He just hoped he wouldn't find what he feared. Returning to his office, he pulled out a blank notebook. If he was going to treat this like an investigation, he wanted to do it right. He placed a sheet of paper on the desk and began taking notes, starting with the information Alice had given him. He printed out and attached the photos she had sent, then added the comparative photos he had taken of the kids' faces, writing paternity underneath them. He opened his calendar and quickly reviewed the dates. Julia's meetings took place like clockwork every 3 months. After noting down the children's birth dates, he did a quick calculation and realized that, in both cases, her pregnancies had apparently begun around the time of those meetings. Coincidence? He asked himself, already knowing the answer. He thought back to the conversation they had after the party where he met Alf. What had she said back then? She had told him she had no regrets. "I have everything a girl could dream of," she had said. Certainly, a lover with plenty of equipment and a clueless husband at home taking care of the kids while she went off to make love in the big city. He glanced at his watch and saw that it was 9:45 p.m. He closed the notebook, locked it in his desk drawer, and grabbed the DNA test kit. Looking up, he noticed that the lights in the kids' bedrooms were off. He crept quietly upstairs and peeked inside. Sure enough, his 2 angels were fast asleep. In a matter of moments, he collected 2 fresh DNA samples without disturbing them. He made sure they were covered and kissed them gently on the forehead before leaving their rooms. He added his own DNA sample to the kit, filled out the paperwork, and stored everything in his briefcase. He hated doing this, but he decided it was something he had to do. Sitting back in his chair, he reflected on the situation and considered what he would do once he knew the truth. If she had been unfaithful, divorce was inevitable, but that would open another Pandora's box. What about custody of the kids? Child support? Alimony? He made a note to consult a family law attorney. There were other concerns as well. Could she be accused of fraud or perjury if she knew Alf was the father but listed me on the birth certificates? If Alf turned out to be the father, could he be held responsible for back child support? "What have you done, Julie?" he asked himself. He crawled into bed but found it nearly impossible to sleep. Julie returned from her meeting around 11:45 p.m. and found him still awake in bed. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Not really," he said. "Do you want to talk about it?" "It's the case I'm working on," he said. A man comes home and finds out that his entire marriage was a lie, discovers that the kids he's supported for over 10 years aren't even his. "Oh my God," she said, startled. "What happened?" "He killed her, Julie, barehanded." "That poor man," she said quietly. He looked at her for a moment before saying anything else. Yeah, he said. I can't even imagine how he must have felt. Makes me feel a little lucky that I don't have those problems. She smiled but didn't respond immediately, carefully formulating her reply. You know I love you, right? She asked. Yes, I know, he said. You don't believe me? She asked. Of course I believe you, he replied. Good, she said. It's better that way. By the way, I'll be leaving a day early, on Thursday, she added. What? Tom asked. Tomorrow. Why? I need to take care of something over there before the official meetings start, she said. I'll pack my things in the morning before heading to work. I left a copy of my itinerary for you on the kitchen table. Sorry for the late notice. What about the reservation? He asked. It was made this morning, she said. So, you've known since this morning? He asked. I just didn't think it was a big deal, she said. Is this a problem? Well, I was hoping to have one more day with you before you left, he said. I'm sorry, she replied. Look, I'm exhausted. I need to take a shower and get out of these clothes, then I'll go to bed. Sure, he said. You must be tired. Thanks for understanding. She went into the bathroom and closed the door. Tom took the opportunity to quietly take her phone from her purse. He tried to unlock it using the passcode he had known for years, but it didn't work. When did she change it? He wondered. He put the phone back and rummaged through her purse a bit more, something he had never done before. He was curious about what he might find. That's when he found a box labeled Plan B. Beneath the label, it read Emergency Contraceptive. He knew exactly what it was for, and his heart sank further. He knew she was still taking birth control pills. She had always claimed they helped regulate her periods, and maybe they did, but there was only one reason she would have this, and it made him feel sick. He took a picture of the box with his phone, then put it back in her purse and returned to bed. When Yuli came out of the bathroom, she climbed into bed and snuggled up next to Tom. Instead of holding her as he usually did, he turned away from her as much as possible. Surprised by his coldness, she backed away, tears welling up in her eyes. He knows, she thought to herself. The next morning, he didn't say anything to her as she packed. He showered, shaved, dressed for work, and then went downstairs to have his morning coffee. He grabbed the itinerary she had left on the counter and put it in his briefcase. After dropping the kids off at school, he headed for the door. You're not even going to give me a goodbye kiss, she asked as he reached the door. He stopped, turned around, and looked at her without saying a word. Tom, seriously. You know I love you, right? She said. He replied. Of course, I know. Call me when you arrive. He walked out the door, leaving her standing there, wondering if he knew something. He's definitely upset about something, she thought. He's never been this cold before. Tom scanned and emailed Julia's itinerary to Roger, along with any photos he had of her and Alf. Then he dropped off the DNA samples and scheduled an afternoon meeting with Lucy Hawkins, a divorce attorney well known for her fierce stance against cheating spouses. Many on the police force referred to her as the cop's best friend, next to the bartender. She despised cheaters, especially those who targeted law enforcement officers. After making the arrangements, Tom forced himself to focus on work. He thought he had pulled himself together until he received a call from his boss, Captain Smith. Lieutenant Williams, Smith said. Get your ass to my office, now. On my way, boss, Tom said, grimacing as he glanced at his fellow detectives. Close the door, Smith said when Tom entered his office. Sit down, before you fall down. Tom sat down as Captain Smith closed the blinds. He looked at Tom before speaking. All right, Tom. Talk to me, what's going on? I think my wife is cheating on me, Tom said. Welcome to the club, my friend, Smith said. Happens to all of us at some point. You don't get it, Tom said. What do you mean? Smith asked. This isn't a typical case. I think she's been cheating on me for our entire marriage. I have reasons to believe the kids might not even be mine. Oh, Tom, Smith said, genuinely concerned. I'm really sorry to hear that. I have a meeting with Lucy this afternoon, Tom said. Good. You might also want to talk to Wilkerson. Who's that? A local psychiatrist. Tom asked, puzzled. Yeah, it won't hurt. You're going through a tough time right now, Smith said. I need you at your best, and unfortunately, you're not at your best right now. I know your world feels like it's falling apart, but you're not the first person this has happened to. If you need some extra time to take care of your personal matters, that's fine. Just don't lose focus on your job. Pull yourself together. Got it? I understand, Captain. Thank you. Yeah, Smith said with a smile and a wink. Now get out of here, you slacker. Tom thought about what the captain said and decided to visit Dr. Donna Wilkerson after contacting the rest of his team. Well, for once, the great Tom Williams is knocking on my door, Donna said when he showed up. Donna was an attractive brunette with brown eyes. She was also married with 3 kids. Please, come in and have a seat, she said. Tom entered her office, closed the door, and sat down. This must be serious. What's going on, Lieutenant? Donna asked. He told her everything he had discovered so far. But you don't have any real evidence yet, do you? She asked. I'm in the process of getting it now, he replied. Have you talked to a lawyer? She asked. I have an appointment with Lucy Hawkins this afternoon, Tom said. Donna nodded. This is serious, isn't it? Yes, he said. If what I suspect is true, I'll never be able to forgive her or turn a blind eye. It's over. Have you told the kids? No, he said. Not yet. You know they'll be devastated by this. You're the only father they've ever known, she said. If you're not careful, this could traumatize them for years. I know, he said. But I've always taught them to tell the truth, no matter how much it hurts at first. I can't hide this from them. Eventually, they'll find out, it's better if it comes from me first. How are you holding up through all this? She asked. Not well, he admitted. If what I suspect is true, then the last 20 years have been a lie. I suppose you haven't talked to your wife about this yet, have you? Donna asked. No. I wanted to gather all the facts first, he said. That's probably reasonable, she said. Maybe we should talk more after you find out what's really going on. And remember, your kids are the most important thing in your life. Their needs should come first. I've never forgotten that, he said. But now it feels like they're not even my kids. Maybe you're not their biological father, but there's no doubt that you are their father. You're the one who raised them and made them who they are today. Never forget that, Tom. I won't forget, Donna, he said. Good, she said. I think we should talk more after you gather all the facts. You're going to get through this, Tom. No matter how much it hurts now, you'll get through it. Just don't let it destroy you or your kids. My door is always open, and everything we talk about here is confidential. I appreciate that, Donna, he said, standing up. Thanks. I'll be in touch. That afternoon, he found himself in the office of Lucy Hawkins, a seasoned attorney. She listened attentively as he told his story. You said you already have a private investigator in New York, she asked. Yes, he confirmed. And you're waiting for the results of the DNA test, she continued. That's right, he said. She nodded. I don't want to rush into anything, she said. Let's see what the evidence shows before making any drastic decisions. However, I have to say, it really bothers me that she seems to be talking about you at her workplace. Technically, that could be considered defamation and grounds for legal action. I'm also concerned about the birth certificates, Tom said. If she knew I wasn't the father when she signed them, could she be charged with paternity fraud or perjury? According to state law, yes, she replied. Different states handle these situations in different ways, but in this state, if she knowingly listed you as the father and signed those certificates while aware that you weren't the biological father, she could be fined up to $10,000 and sentenced to 5 years in prison for each offense. And if the real father had known about it at the time, it could have been considered a conspiracy, which, as you know, is a serious crime. In this state, yes, it could become a legal mess, she said. Look, let me do this, I'll open a case, but I won't prepare anything until we have solid evidence. In the meantime, I'll get my investigators involved to see what we can find out. Keep me informed at all times, and don't give Yuli the slightest reason to suspect anything. Don't do anything stupid or irrational. And remember, your kids are your primary concern. I understand, he said. They ended the meeting, and Tom went home. As soon as he walked through the door, Roger called him. Hey, buddy, Roger said. How are you holding up? Okay, I guess, Tom replied. Julie should already be on her way. I just talked to my lawyer, and we're waiting for evidence before making any moves. All right, Roger said. It cost a couple $100, but I managed to get a camera into her hotel room. It's voice and motion activated and has its own web server for remote access. Let me give you the IP address and login credentials so you can check it yourself if you want. You can even stream and record video. Okay, give me what I need, Tom said. Roger gave him the address and credentials, and Tom wrote everything down. Thanks, man, he said. No problem, Roger replied. I'm heading to the airport now. Her flight should land in about an hour, and I'll handle things from there. We'll talk soon. They ended the call, and Tom turned on his computer. Meanwhile, Julie Williams was sitting in the window seat of a plane bound for New York, reflecting on her life as she stared out of the window. She had been married to the most wonderful man a woman could dream of for almost 20 years. Tom was a respected and decorated police officer, devoted to his work and his family. He was an incredible father to their 2 children. He went out of his way for them, teaching them how to fish, play ball, and even taking them to the shooting range when they were older, showing them how to handle firearms. A part of her felt guilty about what she had been doing all these years, but she couldn't help herself. Alf had been her first true love. Besides, he knew how to control her desires. She had wanted to marry him and have children with him, but he had made it clear he didn't want the responsibility of raising kids. She was heartbroken when he left for New York and even more so when he said he would date other women. But she decided that if he could do that, so could she. That's when she met Tom Williams, a Marine veteran who wanted to become a police officer. Physically, Tom was very similar to Alf. He could be demanding when necessary, but unlike Alf, he treated her like a queen. She fell in love with him and decided to marry him, but deep down, she still wanted Alf's children. She kept in touch with Alf, mostly through emails and text messages. Tom respected her enough not to ask about her past, and she used that to her advantage. By that time, Alf had already built a solid reputation at Apex Financials, and it was his recommendation that secured Julie the job. Their affair began during her first quarterly meeting in New York. She knew she had to be careful and always took extra measures to keep Tom in the dark. She called him every night when she was away and made sure to come home impeccably clean. Since she only wanted to have children with Alf, she carefully planned her birth control routine. She and Tom had discussed having children and agreed that she would take birth control pills until they were ready. She took the pills as planned but stopped just before her trips, without telling her husband. On several occasions, when Tom initiated intimacy, she would push him away, claiming she was on her period or didn't feel well. The truth was, she didn't want to risk getting pregnant by her husband. Tom had been in the police academy for 3 months when she became pregnant with Andrew. She knew the baby was Alf's, but she told Tom it was his. He was surprised, knowing she had been taking the pills, but at the same time, he was thrilled at the idea of becoming a father. When Andrew was born, Julie immediately knew he was Alf's baby. Tom, however, was so engrossed in admiring the newborn that he didn't notice. But his mother did. More than once, she commented on Andrew's features, which didn't resemble Tom's. Tom insisted that his wife would never cheat on him and dismissed the matter. Of course, Alf also knew Andrew was his son, but they both agreed that Tom would be the one called Dad. The same scenario repeated itself when Julie became pregnant with Marie. After Marie's birth, she told Tom that the delivery had been very difficult and begged him to undergo a procedure to prevent further pregnancies. Concerned for his wife's health and safety, Tom agreed. After his surgery, Julie felt relieved. She no longer had to worry about getting pregnant by her husband. Still, she continued taking the pills, telling him they helped regulate her menstrual cycle. Her affair with Alf continued, and she saw him every time she traveled east. Initially, they were discreet, not wanting to cause any rumors at the office. She wasn't worried about Tom finding out about Alf because they lived more than 1,000 miles apart, and Alf had never visited her city. That changed on the night of the Christmas party. She cornered Alf when she saw him for the first time that evening and told him to stay calm around Tom. The last thing she wanted was a confrontation between her husband and her lover. "Don't worry," Alf said. "I fool people all the time. Your little detective won't suspect a thing," he added quietly. On the way home, however, Tom began talking about her relationship with her ex. When he asked if she had any regrets, she avoided the question, saying she had everything a woman could dream of. And it was true, she had a wonderful husband who was also a great father, and she had a lover who satisfied her desires. She continued seeing Alf, but over time, some people began to notice. A few years ago, Alice, a new girl who had just joined Julie's team, confronted her. Not wanting to cause problems, Julie lied to Alice. "Look, Alice," she said, "my husband knows all about this. We have something like an open marriage. He's okay with it as long as it happens out of town. Besides, he got injured in the line of duty, and, well, we can barely be intimate anyway. Please, don't say anything to anyone, okay? He's already embarrassed enough by this." "Well, all right," Alice said. "I still don't think it's right, but I won't say anything." "Thank you, Alice. It means a lot to me," Julie replied. "Tom and I are truly happy, and he gets along great with the kids. I don't want to ruin this. If this ever comes out, it would be devastating." But in recent days, Tom seemed different. He said it was just a case he was working on, but Julie wondered if it was a cover. She simply didn't know. Lately, she had started thinking about the future. Andrew was about to graduate from high school and had made it clear that he wanted to follow in Tom's footsteps. Marie was approaching 17, and she wasn't sure what she wanted to do with her life. Soon, both kids would leave home. And then what? She wondered. She and Alf had talked about the possibility of divorce, but she wanted to wait a little longer, maybe until Tom retired from the police force, so she could claim half of his pension along with half of everything else. Then, she could move to New York and be with Alf full-time. But she wasn't sure if that was what Alf truly wanted. She was pulled back to reality when the captain announced that the plane was beginning its descent into LaGuardia Airport. She sat up straight, noticing the blinking seatbelt sign above her, folded her tray, and fastened her seatbelt. Meanwhile, Tom was watching the monitor on his screen. He checked his watch and calculated that she should be arriving at her hotel room any minute. Suddenly, the video feed started, and he saw his wife entering the room, followed by Alf. He was stunned by how similar this man looked to his children. As he continued watching, Julie dropped her luggage on the floor, then turned and kissed Alf. Tom felt sick. "So, how's it going with your deputy friend?" Alf asked mockingly. Please, don't talk about Tom, Julie said. Sure, Alf replied with a smirk. He's a very respectable police officer, he added sarcastically. I see how much you respect him, he continued. He's so good that he still doesn't realize what you've been doing behind his back all these years. He's been raising my kids all this time and still has no idea. Maybe I should send him a Father's Day card to thank him for the brilliant job he's done. Don't you dare. Julie snapped, slapping his hand. You're going to ruin everything. When are you going to leave him? Alf asked. Not until the kids are out of the house, she said. Maybe only after he retires. That way, I can get a decent share of his pension. You know, Alf said, I was thinking of asking them to transfer you to my department. You'd still keep your work history, and we could be together permanently. What do you think? Maybe after the kids leave, she replied. Once they graduate, it won't matter. Right now, they need me there with Tom. How much time are we talking about? Alf asked. Well, Marie will soon turn 17, she said. I'd say no more than a year and a half, maybe 2 years at most. Considering we've been doing this for 20 years, it should be a piece of cake. I want you to meet your kids, at least once. I think you'll fall in love with them as soon as you see them. No, we agreed, remember? Alf said. From the moment you got pregnant the first time, we said I wouldn't have any contact with them. We even agreed that they'd grow up thinking they were Tom's kids. Remember? I remember, she said. I just think it would be nice if you got to know them. Maybe someday, after you divorce the cop, Alf said. By the way, we have a dinner reservation. You'd better get ready. All right, she said. I'm going to take a shower and change. See you downstairs in, say, half an hour. See you then, he said, kissing her. I love you, Julie. I love you too, Alf, she said, repeating the same words she often said to Tom. I always have. Tom felt as though he'd been punched in the stomach. And I love you too, Julie, Alf replied. See you downstairs. He got up and left the room while Tom watched through the live video feed. He saw Julia take out her phone and dial a number. A few seconds later, his phone rang. He pulled it out, thinking about sending it to voicemail, but after a few rings, he answered. Yes, he said. Hey, Tom, it's me, Julie, she said. I know, he replied. I just wanted to let you know I arrived in New York, she said. Okay, he responded. Okay, she repeated. How's your case going, she asked. I think everything will be resolved by the time you get back, he said. I'm very, very close to catching my main suspect. I'm glad, she said. I could tell how much it was bothering you. You have no idea, he said. I'm going out to dinner, but I'll call you tomorrow night, all right, she asked. That's fine, he said. I love you very much, Tom. You know that, right? She asked. Yeah, sure, he said. I'll tell the kids you called and sent your regards. We'll talk later. Bye. He ended the call, wondering if she had noticed that he never said he loved her back. He turned his attention back to the video feed. She stared at her phone for a few seconds after he hung up, and he could tell from her expression that she was worried. Good, he thought. He made sure the video was saved to his hard drive, intending to burn it onto a DVD later. Turning off the monitor, he went to the living room. By then, the kids had already returned from school. The next day, he received a call from the DNA lab informing him that the results were ready. He went in to pick them up and wasn't surprised to learn that neither of the kids was biologically his. Now it's official, he thought that he took the DVD he had recorded the night before, along with the DNA test results, to Lucy's office. The DNA test is solid, Lucy said, but you know I can't use the video as evidence in court. I understand, Tom said. However, I think we have enough evidence to start the process. We'll file for divorce on the grounds of adultery and fraud. This is a community property state, but the court does take adultery into account when it comes to dividing assets. Still, I'm not entirely sure we can pursue the paternity fraud charge since the evidence can't be presented in court. And what if I can get her to admit what she did? Tom asked. Maybe, if it's in the presence of witnesses, Lucy said. Let me think about this for a moment. Come see me on Wednesday. I'll have something figured out by then. All right. See you Wednesday, Tom said before leaving. That night, Yulie called as usual, right after making love with Alf. She was good at ensuring her lover remained quiet while she was on the phone. Apparently, after years of deception, they had mastered the art. Tom made sure never to tell her he loved her during the call. On Wednesday, Tom met with Lucy as requested. This time, there was another man in her office, Marvin Morrison, the district attorney. Also present was Deputy Sarah Miles. Tom had worked with her several times in the past, and they had become good friends. Before the meeting began, everyone shook hands. Lieutenant Williams, Marvin said. Lucy brought your case to my attention, and I agree, what your wife did was deliberate fraud. But we need more than just the video recordings from the hotel room. What do you suggest? Tom asked. Maybe, if you can get your wife to admit that she knowingly signed the birth certificates fraudulently, we can detain and charge her, Marvin said. She's supposed to be back on Saturday morning, Tom said. I'll ask her about it when she calls tonight. All right, Marvin said. I also suggest having a witness present. I assume you know Deputy Miles. Yes, we know each other, Tom said. Even better, Marvin added. Get your wife to admit what she did, preferably on a recording, so that Deputy Miles can serve her with the divorce papers and arrest her at the same time. Understood, Tom said. I'll let you know when to expect her. He turned to Sarah. I'll make sure the kids are out of the house. I don't want them to see their mother being taken away in handcuffs. Tom confirmed Yulie's return later that night when she called. Are you still planning to return Saturday morning? He asked. Of course, she said. All right, Tom said. Maybe we could have a little party or something when you get back. That sounds lovely, she said. You know I love you and miss you, right? Yeah, sure, Tom said in a neutral tone. You don't love me? She asked. You haven't told me you love or miss me all week. I did love you, he said deliberately. We'll talk later. Bye. He ended the call, wondering if she had caught the past tense he had used on purpose. He turned back to the monitor and saw her staring at her phone with a worried expression on her face. At the same time, he smiled, watching her put down the phone and climb into bed next to Alf. So? Alf asked. They want to throw a party when you get back. How unusual, she said. What's bothering you, Tom? She asked. He's been so cold all week. He said he's working on a case that's really getting to him, but I'm starting to wonder if he knows about us. He doesn't know anything, Alf said firmly. You don't know Tom like I do, she said. I think he knows, and he's planning something. And what if he does know? Alf asked. What's he going to do, divorce you? In the end, you'll get almost everything, and he'll end up living in a cardboard box and eating cat food. Who knows? Maybe you'll end up biting the bullet yourself and taking everything. Now, why don't you stop worrying about him and focus on us? Alf added. Tom turned off the monitor and let the video save to his hard drive. He put on a brave face for the kids and took them out for dinner. On Friday, Lucy called him, and he went to her office, where Sarah was already waiting. All right, Tom, Lucy said. Here are the divorce papers. We're filing on grounds of adultery and fraud. I've requested custody and that you keep the house. I also asked for a 70/30th division of all marital assets, given the long-term nature of her affair and the fraudulent activities from the start of the marriage. The judge may see things differently, but we'll see how it goes. I've also filed a lawsuit against Alf Henriksen, seeking substantial compensation for child support and related expenses. Deputy Miles will serve the documents on Saturday and, if possible, arrest her if you can get her to admit the fraud. I sent the papers for Alf to New York and requested they be delivered Saturday morning. Any questions? Lucy asked. No, Tom replied. Be at my house by 7:30 if you can, he told Sarah. Her flight is scheduled to land around 7 a.m., and the drive home won't take long. You know the address, right? I do, Tom, Sarah said. I'll be there. Thanks, he said. He took a deep breath and exhaled. I think that's everything. It's time to act. That night, he packed a couple of suitcases and took the kids to Yuli's parents' house. They were confused about what was happening. Is Mom not coming home tomorrow morning? Andrew asked. Yes, she is, Tom said. Then why can't we stay at home? Marie asked. Listen, kids. I need to talk to your mom about something, and it's better if you're not there when it happens, Tom said. I promise I'll explain everything on Saturday afternoon. Are you getting a divorce? Marie asked. Please, Dad, don't tell us you're separating. I'm afraid there's nothing you can do about it, Tom said gently. Did you cheat on her? Marie asked. Tom shook his head. No. In all the time we've been married, I've never even thought about another woman, he said. So, you're saying she cheated on you? Andrew asked. Please, kids, just work with me on this, Tom said. I'll explain everything tomorrow afternoon, I promise. And please, don't say anything to your mother. They got into the car, and the drive to Yuli's parents' house was silent, except for the sound of Marie quietly crying. When they arrived, Yuli's mother, Maggie, greeted them at the door. What's going on, Tom? She asked. Why is Marie crying? Sorry, Maggie, Tom said. I need to talk to Yuli when she gets back. I promise I'll tell everyone what's going on tomorrow afternoon. You're not going to hurt her, are you? Maggie asked. No, I would never do that, he replied. You're divorcing her, aren't you? Maggie pressed. Do you have another woman? No, Tom said. It's the opposite. I'll explain everything tomorrow. Thanks for taking the kids. All right, Tom, Maggie said. You'd better tell us the whole truth tomorrow. I will, trust me, Tom said before leaving. That night, he spoke briefly with Yuli. He watched her on video while she sat, undressed, in bed with Alf. You'll be here tomorrow morning as planned? Tom asked. I will, she replied. How's business? Almost done, he said. I expect that by this time tomorrow, our suspect will be in custody. Good, she said. Then maybe everything will go back to normal. Maybe, he replied. I need to grab something to eat. We'll talk in the morning. Goodbye. He ended the call and continued watching her on the video feed. He saw tears on her face as she stared at her phone. He smiled. Oh yes, he thought, there will be a lot more of that tomorrow. Saturday morning arrived. Sarah showed up shortly before 7 a.m. and helped Tom prepare everything for the final confrontation. Tom had just put out his cigarette when he heard Yuli's car pulling into the garage. He hoped she wouldn't notice the large pile of garbage bags containing all her clothes. He listened and heard the clicking of her high heels on the floor as she walked toward the back terrace. What's going on? She asked, opening the back door. He gestured for her to step out onto the back veranda. Yuli, he said, I hope you had a good flight. Yes, she said, looking around. What's going on? Who is this? Where are the kids? What's that patrol car doing in the driveway? The kids are with your mother right now, he said calmly. This is Officer Sarah Miles, and that's her patrol car outside. Please, sit down. We need to talk. I need to take a shower first, she said. No, Yuli. I said sit down. We need to talk now, he said in a firm tone. Surprised, she slowly sat down in the chair across from Sarah, positioning herself at a 90-degree angle to Tom. He pulled out a digital audio recorder, pressed a button, and placed it on the table. I hope you don't mind if we record this little conversation, he said. Given the nature of this case, I suppose I should read you your rights. He added, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, an attorney will be provided for you. Do you understand these rights as I've read them to you? Of course, she said, stunned. But I'm not one of your suspects. I don't need a lawyer because I haven't done anything. What's going on, Tom? You are, in fact, a suspect, he said. In fact, you're my primary suspect. He pulled out 2 sheets of paper and placed them in front of Yuli. Do you recognize these forms? He asked. Yes, of course, she said nervously. What's this about? These are the kids' birth certificates, she replied. She nodded. For the record, these are true certified copies of the birth certificates of Andrew Jackson Williams, 18, and Mary Constance Williams, 16, Tom said. Now, for the record, whose signature appears on the signature line? That's my signature, she said, her voice trembling slightly. On both of them? Yes. Could you please read the text below the signature? Tom asked. She hesitated before reading aloud, under penalty of perjury, I certify that the above is true and factual. And who is listed as the father? Tom asked. Of course, it's you, she said. Read the name, please, Tom insisted. Thomas Jefferson Williams, she read, her voice barely audible. Tom pulled out another sheet of paper and placed it in front of her. What's this? She asked, her hands shaking. It's a DNA test conducted by Acme Laboratory here in the city, he explained. Pay attention to the summary. 3 samples were taken, sample A, from an adult male, that's me, Tom Williams. Sample B is from Andrew Williams, and sample C is from Mary Williams. Please read the summary below. She scanned the page, her eyes widening. It says the subjects represented by sample B and sample C are related to each other but are not related to the subject represented by sample A, she read quietly. In plain English, that means I am not the biological father of the 2 children listed on these birth certificates, Tom said coldly. So, please tell us, who is their real father? Well, you, of course, she stammered, her voice shaking. Tom shook his head. Please, pay attention to the video on the laptop, he said, turning the screen toward her. Her eyes widened in horror as he played a video of her first encounter with Alf last week. How did you get that? She asked in shock. I asked the questions, Tom said firmly. You and your lover, a certain Alf Henriksen, just admitted on camera that he is the real biological father of the children in question and that both of you conspired to commit fraud by listing my name as the father, knowing it wasn't true. Fine, she snapped angrily. I admit it. I wanted his children, not yours. And yes, I signed the birth certificates listing you as the father. It's my right to decide who I want to see as the father of my children. You don't have the right to commit fraud, Tom said coldly. Now, tell me, what did you tell your coworkers about your long-term relationship with Mr. Henriksen? What does that have to do with anything? She asked defensively. Do you know someone named Alice Blackstone? Tom asked. Yes, she said cautiously. Do you remember what you told her about 5 years ago? He continued, pulling out another sheet of paper. It's vague, she replied hesitantly. I told her we had an open marriage. But we didn't, did we? Tom pressed. No, we never agreed to that, she admitted reluctantly. Do you remember what else you told her? Tom asked. Something about you being injured, she mumbled. According to her, you said, without a doubt, that I was injured in the line of duty and that I was no longer capable of being intimate, Tom said. Do you remember that? Fine, she sighed heavily. Yes, I remember. And according to my lawyer, you told several other people the same thing, didn't you? Yes, she admitted quietly. So, you admit that you lied about me to justify your actions with Alf, right? Tom asked firmly. Yes, she said in a barely audible voice. I don't see any reason to continue this interview, Tom said, turning to Sarah and nodding. She stood up and handed Julia a manila envelope. Julie Williams, you have been served, Sarah said. Tears streamed down Julia's face. Sarah looked at Tom, who nodded again. Please stand up, turn around, and place your hands behind your back, Mrs. Williams, Sarah instructed. Why? Julia asked, her voice trembling. You are under arrest for 2 counts of paternity fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit fraud, Sarah said. What? Julia exclaimed in disbelief. That's right, Yulie, Tom said coldly. What you did is illegal in this state. Adultery is also a misdemeanor here, but the district attorney told me he probably wouldn't be able to secure a conviction on that charge. However, I think it would be wise for you to hire a lawyer before you say anything further. He looked at Sarah and added, take her away. Sarah began leading Julia out. Julia turned back, tears streaming down her cheeks. Tom, please. I love you, she cried. Please, don't do this. I'm glad to hear that from you, Tom said. It makes me shudder to think what you'd do if you didn't love me. He watched as Sarah escorted a sobbing Julia to the patrol car parked outside. Sarah placed her in the back seat and drove off. Tom felt a sense of relief that it was finally over, but he was surprised by the emptiness he felt inside. He had loved her for more than 20 years. How could she have betrayed him like that? Now came the hardest part, facing Yulie's parents and their children to explain what had happened. How could he explain to 2 kids that he had to send their mother to jail, even though he wasn't their biological father? He grabbed his laptop and the USB drive containing the edited video, then drove to Maggie's house, wondering what he would say. When he arrived, he knocked on the door. Maggie opened it and invited him in. I think it's time to explain everything, he said. Where are the kids? He asked. They're in the backyard, Maggie replied. I'll go get them. You should call Cliff too, Tom added. He should hear this as well. Cliff was Yulie's father, and Tom had always admired him. A few minutes later, everyone was gathered in the living room. What's going on, son? Cliff asked. Where's Yulie? I suspect she's already in the county jail, Tom said. In jail? Why? Cliff asked, shocked. The others looked equally stunned. It's a long story, Tom replied. Let me explain. He looked at the kids before continuing, hoping they wouldn't hate him after that day. But deep down, he knew he had done the right thing. A long time ago, your mother decided she didn't want my children, he began, leaving everyone speechless. But we are your children. Mary exclaimed. I raised you, but I'm not your biological father, Tom said gently. There was a man she was engaged to more than 20 years ago, before she met me. She wanted to marry him, but he didn't want the responsibility of having kids. Wait a minute, I remember that guy, Maggie said. A tall blonde man with long hair. I think he's Norwegian. I have a photo of them somewhere. Maggie pulled out a photo album and found a picture. She showed it to Cliff, whose eyes widened as he noticed the striking resemblance between Alf and the children. Yes, his name is Alf Henriksen, Tom said. Anyway, Yulia decided she would have children with him, even though he didn't want them. So, she's in jail for spending a night with another man? Andrew asked. No, she's in jail for something called paternity fraud, Tom explained. When you were born, she filled out the birth certificate and signed it, stating that I was your father, even though she knew from the beginning that I wasn't. Worse, she and this Alf conspired to force me to raise his children as if they were mine. What she did is illegal and could result in a fine of up to $10,000 and 5 years in prison. That's not all, Cliff said, concerned. There's more. Yes, Tom continued. After Marie was born, she asked me to undergo a procedure, knowing full well that the kids weren't mine. Thanks to her, I can't have children anymore. And she had an affair with this guy the entire time we were married. Every time she flew east, she was with him. Just last week, she was discussing the possibility of divorcing me and moving in with him. I have everything on video if you want to see it. Oh my God, Maggie whispered, stunned. As you can imagine, I'm divorcing her, Tom said. And what about us? Marie asked, her voice trembling. What's going to happen to us now? Are we orphans? No, sweetheart, Tom said gently. I went to court to request custody of both of you. I may not be your biological father, but I raised you, and I can't imagine not having you in my life. I fell in love with both of you the moment I saw you. Marie ran to him and hugged him tightly. Oh, Daddy, she cried. I love you too. Tom looked up and saw Andrew approaching slowly, struggling to hold back his tears. Tom extended a hand toward him while still holding Marie. It's okay to cry, son, Tom said softly. I did it myself often. Am I still your son? Andrew asked, tears streaming down his face. Tom nodded. Of course, he said. You'll always be my son. Andrew joined his father and sister, and the three of them embraced, crying together. I love you, Dad, Andrew said. I love you too, son, Tom replied, tears running down his own face. Everything will be okay, kids. We'll get through this together. What will happen to Yulia now? Cliff asked after Tom and the kids had composed themselves. Well, they took her to the county jail, Tom explained. I believe they might call you soon. The district attorney is planning to charge her, and from what I understand, they're working on extraditing Henriksen to face conspiracy charges. The DA plans to argue that Yulia is a potential flight risk and might flee to New York if released on bail. We'll see how it goes, probably on Monday, when she has her first hearing. And if they let her out on bail? Maggie asked. I'd be surprised if they did, Tom said, but she might ask to stay with you. Just so you know, I've already collected all her things, they're in the garage now. At that moment, the house phone rang. Maggie answered and found herself speaking to a hysterical Julia. She eventually managed to calm her down enough to listen. Yulia, Tom is here, and he told us what you did, Maggie said. I have to say, I'm very disappointed in you. If you didn't want Tom's children, you shouldn't have married him. We heard Yulia say something on the other end of the line. Yulia, you broke the law, Maggie said firmly. We raised you better than this. If they let you out, you can stay here, but don't expect us to approve of what you did, and we believe the children should stay with Tom. We heard something from Yulia on the other end, and Maggie called out to the kids. Kids, do you want to talk to your mother? Maggie asked. Andrew and Marie looked at each other for a few moments before shouting in unison, no. Tom and Cliff laughed when they heard this. Maggie went back to the phone. Sorry, Yulia, but they're not interested in talking to you right now, she said. Maybe they will after they calm down a bit. Yes, we'll see if we can find a lawyer for you. It's time to go, Yulia, it was nice talking to you. We heard Yulia crying, even after Maggie hung up the phone. Well, that's that, Cliff said. This girl still has a lot of growing up to do. Look, why don't the kids stay here one more night so their dad can take care of some things at home? All right, Andrew said, and Marie agreed. Maggie looked at Tom, who was still a little shaken by everything that had happened. Everything will be fine, Tom, she said. We'll be here for you and the kids. Why don't you go home and get things sorted out? You can come pick them up tomorrow. Thank you, Tom said, hugging her. Cliff shook his hand, and Tom hugged the kids again. See you tomorrow, he said. I love you both, and I'm very proud of you. We love you too, Dad, Marie said. Yulie was brought to her hearing the following Monday. After hearing the district attorney Marvin Morrison's arguments, the judge ordered that she be held without bail, fearing she might flee the area and head to New York to be with her lover. 3 months later, the jury found her guilty of 2 counts of paternity fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit fraud. The judge sentenced her to a total of 10 years in prison, making her eligible for parole after 6 years. Her company fired her following the verdict. Alf was extradited, tried, found guilty, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. He would be eligible for parole in 3 years, and his company also terminated his employment. The civil case against Alf took a bit longer, but the jury awarded Tom a significant settlement, which he immediately donated to the Children's College Fund. The defamation lawsuit was dismissed after a judge ruled that Tom hadn't suffered actual damages. Tom's divorce was granted based on Lucy's petition. Yulie was awarded 30% of their joint bank accounts, which Tom had set aside so she could access them once she was released from prison. He never visited her in prison, though the kids did once. After that, they never went back. Andrew later told Tom that Marie had been so upset and angry with their mother during the visit that she almost had to be restrained. Andrew graduated from high school and followed in his father's footsteps by joining the Marine Corps, where he became a military police officer. Tom was so proud of his son that he took Marie with him to watch Andrew graduate as an honorary recruit in his platoon. Tom continued his police service and was eventually promoted to captain after Captain J. Smith retired. His personal life practically disappeared, and he had no desire to date anyone. That didn't stop Marie from playing matchmaker. One day, she came home with a note and handed it to him. My English teacher, Miss Harris, wants to see you tomorrow after school, she said. I know you're stuck at your desk all day, so there's no reason you can't go. You're not trying to play matchmaker again, are you? Tom asked, raising an eyebrow. Who, me? Marie asked, raising her own eyebrows playfully. The next day, Tom went to meet Miss Harris. When he arrived at her classroom, she stood up and extended her hand, which he accepted. However, the moment their hands touched, he felt overwhelmed. Ah, nice to meet you, Miss Harris, he said, stumbling over his words. He didn't want to let go of her hand. He looked at her, hoping it wasn't too obvious that he liked what he saw. She was a petite brunette with pretty brown eyes, well-proportioned, and had a lovely smile. Oh, please, call me Brenda, Captain Williams, she said with a warm smile. And you can call me Tom, he replied. Marie said you wanted to see me. Is that true? He asked. Oh, did I say that? I don't remember, Brenda said with a slight laugh. Well, it's always nice to meet the parents of my students. I understand you're divorced. Yes, that's right, he replied. And you're raising a teenage daughter. I'm impressed, it can't be easy. Well, I'm armed and have handcuffs, he said with a grin. She laughed, noticing that he wasn't wearing a ring but could see faint marks where one used to be. I see you're not married, Tom said. That's right, she replied. I'm divorced too. It looks like your daughter is trying to play matchmaker. My daughter did the same thing before she left for college, Brenda said. Well, I don't want to take up more of your time, Tom said. I'll leave you to your work. It's fine, she said. I was just about to grab a quick bite to eat and head back to my old, lonely house. Well, if you're not too busy, maybe we could have dinner together, and perhaps a glass of wine afterward? Why not? Brenda said with a smile. Just one thing, Tom added, smiling. If you don't mind me asking, there isn't some ex-boyfriend from college lurking in the background, is there? She laughed. Oh, heavens no, she said. All right then, Tom replied, offering his hand. What do you like to eat? He asked, guiding her out of the classroom.